I would like to invite a person whose presence at our conference has already become a tradition, a dear friend of ours, a simulation education specialist and professor emeritus of industrial and system engineering at Mississippi State University. He is also the author of more than 150 creative works and co-author of the book, which is well known and appreciated by many of you, Applied Simulation, Modeling and Analysis using FlexSim. Today, he will give a presentation titled Planning and Simulation Journey and Where to Start. Many people are looking forward to his presentation. I am pleased to invite Professor Alan Greenwood to the stage. We will welcome him with a big round of applause, and he has specially flown all the way from the USA to join us today. So let's make the applause for Professor Greenwood.
Okay. Okay, well, good morning. This feels a little weird, but I'll get used to it. It's great to be back here again, and again, we look forward to a very interesting conference today, and I hope you find at least the first one to start with a little bit interesting as well. What I'd like to talk about today is planning a simulation journey and where to start, and so let's get started. Let's see. Oh, good. Okay. So, quick introduction of, okay, what is a simulation journey? And basically, it's just a pathway to learning about the application of simulation to enhance operations, basically. And so, I think we all know kind of what simulation is, but in about as short as definition as you can get. We use models and analysis to measure the effects of change in some type of system, and again, with the hope of making an improvement. An operations system, or operations in general, is basically where work gets done, okay, in the simplest terms. But we're concerned with the flow of items through this system, working with the various set of resources, and this happens across both space and time. And so it may be, when I talk about items, it might be parts going through a manufacturing facility, patients going through a healthcare clinic, ships going through a port, orders going through a warehouse, and so forth. Okay? So the approach that I kind of used in doing this is to start with a quick look at the FlexSim market, both from an academic standpoint, the academic market, and then also from the commercial side, and to look at stakeholder needs in both of those different markets, and then to apply what's a lot of times called the 5W1H approach, which is who, what, when, where, why, and how. Okay? So a little bit of my observations of the FlexSim market, especially let's start with the academic world, is of course the focus is on education, whereas we'll see the focus in the commercial environment is primarily on training. So I differentiate between education and training. Our primary focus, and a lot of this is, of course, coming from my perspective in the US, but I've been exposed to other markets, so I think some of this certainly translates to various places around the world as well. Most of the simulation vendors, FlexSim and their competitors, have primarily focused on the industrial engineering, management science field, and within that, the 1 semester long simulation class and maybe a second course, either advanced undergraduate or graduate degree, in terms of trying to serve that market. And the focus is on modeling and analysis. And that's fine. I mean, that's a good market. But I think there's other opportunities out there that we hope to try to tap. And those are courses that are not focused on simulation, but where we can use simulation to teach concepts and let students experiment and so forth. And that opens up a lot of opportunities in other engineering courses where students get exposed to simulation and really start to understand the power of what simulation can do. But also in the business schools. And so there's a lot of courses there where we can integrate simulation. And that doesn't mean teaching them to model, basically to use the software. And so in those environments, we're primarily talking about using pre-built models in games, okay, or the two biggest applications. Another place where I see as an opportunity, and I've run into this just quite a bit recently in the US, although I knew it's been around for a while, is to use simulation for what we call outreach to both to prospective students and to industry. And by that is, again, just demonstrating the power of what simulation can do. I'll bring up an example that, again, I've been doing this for a number of years, but it's seems new in some of the universities are just trying to get into thinking about this. But we always used to have, when I was at Mississippi State, we had like an engineering day, and typically tied to a football game weekend. So we had a lot of people on campus, and they would come around and they would visit engineering disciplines just to understand, a lot of small kids, families, to see, well, what do engineers do? And, you know, as industrial engineers, it was kind of, it became a little bit hard. You can't bring a factory in, you know, into, as a demonstration. And the mechanical engineers would always bring in a car, you know, a nice fancy car where they're designing a race car or something. But then what we did is we had built some simulation models when they opened a Nissan plant in the area, and we helped with that launching of that plant by using simulation to test to see if things are going to work when they actually started producing. So we had a lot of FlexSim models and videos and so forth. So we would show those, and we got a lot of attention. And so I think a lot of universities are starting to look at doing that, especially focused on industries in their area. And so I think that's another opportunity for us to expose people to the power of simulation. One thing I think in terms of some issues, and I know in thinking back about some of my teaching career, I would do things differently today in that when you teach that simulation class, that's required. So everybody in our case, in most of the universities in the U.S. in industrial engineering programs, that's a required course. Everybody has to take it. Out of that class, how many of those students are really going to be modelers? Probably not very many. But that's what we're really focusing on, and I think we should, because that's a very important skill to have in general. In addition to just learning a software, just the process of going through modeling, I think, is a really valuable education experience. But sometimes we might overly focus on the modeling part, and then the students that have come out of there may have missed seeing what the real value of simulation is and where they can use it when they get out into industry, or be a proponent. So I think it's really important that we make sure they understand that, and not, oh, this is a really hard, because a lot of times they said, this is a really hard course. And part of it is it brings together a lot of the things they'd already had, you know, some programming, statistics, things like that all came together. And so it was a difficult course, but we want to make sure that everybody left there with a good understanding of what really what is simulation and you know, how's it used. And I think we can also convey that through some of these outreach events and also in courses that aren't focused on simulation, because they'll see firsthand how valuable it is in the decision-making process. So looking at the commercial market, the focus here is learning a software, basically. So it's training. I question on whether maybe we ought to expand that a little bit and do a little bit of education, a little bit broader on what simulation is. And some people may do that, not knowing how you do your training or courses and so forth. You may already do that, which would be, I think, is great. And in this case, the focus is really pretty apparent. Most people coming into a training program have a problem they're trying to solve. And so giving context is probably not that critical as it is in a more general setting. But one thing that we need to think about, I think, is the stakeholders in a simulation project. And most of them are not modelers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And so I think that's an area that we could, again, do a little bit better on. And I think this environment has changed quite a bit by FlexSim being acquired by Autodesk, in that now FlexSim is in a company of 14,000 people. And many of those either don't know what simulation is, or they have a different perception of what simulation is than what we do. And so we need a way to kind of educate them fairly quickly, at least on what is the basic thing that FlexSim does and simulation does in our context. All right, so who are these journeyers, if you will? Academic worlds, obviously, it's students and faculty. And they're, again, involved in that simulation class, some other classes like maybe a production class or even a statistics class or whatever, or healthcare and engineering type classes that aren't simulation focused. A lot of students self-educate, especially graduate students. They may get in and say, I'm going to do a thesis or I need a software to help me do that. And so they don't have a course to take necessarily. And so they end up learning, say, the software itself on their own. So they need the materials basically to do that. And of course, come back a second. Then faculty are either teaching those classes that I mentioned, or they're involved in research. And how do we use simulation in the research? And if we get to a particular software, then how do I learn that software if I want to use it in my research? And again, in outreach that I mentioned earlier, recruiting students, recruiting industry, and so forth into partnering with the university. When you go to the industry side, obviously it's engineers and consultants are the primary users. Also people involved in software sales, and those project stakeholders again, those other people involved in a simulation study. And so if we look at, we really need to look at that group from, why are they doing this? What's their objective? And make sure that we educate them or train them to meet that objective. And what is their background? What do they already know about simulation? What do they already know about, say, FlexSim, if we're doing FlexSim training? And so I think that needs to be a conscious effort when we're putting together materials to do training and education. So I talked about stakeholders. So who are these stakeholders in a simulation project. And of course, the modeler, of course, and it's the one we think about the most, and that's where most of the work is being done and so forth, is in the modeling effort. There's also the analyst, the people that, okay, now I've got the model and it runs, and I've designed some experiments and I want to run comparisons and so forth. So do the analysis. It could be the same person. Depending on the scale of a simulation project, you may have multiple modelers, or you may have a modeler that's doing multiple roles, if it's small, okay? And the model user, who's going to be actually using this in the company. It might be the modeler, just doing the analysis and providing it to the company, or there may be somebody on within the company itself that's going to be running this on a routine basis. Then we get into who's providing the data. And again, it's probably not one person. You know, it's probably multiple people in this organization that's providing data that's got to go into that, and the domain experts that's going to explain how does this thing work, how does the system work, and validate the models. Is the model reflecting what we would tend to see in a real system? And there's a lot of things that go into a simulation in terms of data and logic and so forth. And you know, whether it's you know, facilities layouts or product diagrams and value stream maps and discussions with people on the shop floor and so forth. So there's a large number of people that are actually involved in most studies. Even a small study, there's a number of stakeholders. And of course, the decision maker, the one you're doing the simulation for. And so these are all the people that are involved in a typical simulation study, and we have to think about what do they need to know. They don't all need to be modelers, and we're not going to make them modelers. Oh, one I left out, always leave out, is the person that's affected by this simulation study because there may be a change that's being made, but they actually weren't identified as a stakeholder at the beginning. So they're impacted by this, but they may not be. Hopefully you include as many as you can, but sometimes we'll always miss somebody, and so we'll include them there. Okay, so what kind of resources do we have available for this? And then what is their availability? And I'll just run through this really kind of quickly because kind of most of these is obviously there's FlexSim training, which is typically available, at least the PowerPoint and so forth is available online. And then there's a whole host of videos, again, primarily online. Certainly the FlexSim website or websites, whether it's InterMarium or the FlexSim USA. E-learning, and I'm going to talk more about this, is a valuable resource. There's not much of that out there. InterMarium has done a great job with that. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But that's pretty limited availability of what's available within that e-learning center. And then there's a lot, when I say ad hoc, if you Google FlexSim or how to do something, you'll get tons of things coming up. Some of them very good, and some of them maybe not so good, but they're not, none of these things are very well structured. There's quite a few books and primers and manuals and so forth, and again, their availability varies. And some of those are being updated. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Case studies. I know that especially in the academic world, case studies are really valuable, and people like to get them, but there's not as many around as we would like. Games, again, just becoming a lot more popular. The interest in games and also the production of games, again, especially things being done at InterMarium, but again, a limited availability. FlexSim teaching materials, we used to, again, from the US side, we would provide teaching materials, typically like from my class or Bill Nordgren's class, and those are getting a little old, and always felt they really weren't well structured, so we're in the process now of basically going to put together a university course, slides, quizzes, and so forth, that in a better format, better structure, and then people can use what they want of that or not. And that will kind of replace these just materials that are there. It'll be a really structured, organized course that'll be available. And we're hoping to get all that done by the end, well, by the end of the year or 1st of December, which is aggressive, but we're moving there. So these are things available, but I don't think they're very well structured in trying to point somebody to something to get access. Again, some websites or some distributors and so forth do a better job of this maybe than others. But there's a lot of kind of key resources that are available. If you haven't already picked up one, make sure you pick up the most recent edition of Simulation Manager, because there's several articles in there that points to the things that I'm talking about. When I was putting together the presentation and I got looking at Simulation Manager, I said, well, gee, I need to really address this because there's a lot of good stuff here. And so some of those are related to Christoph's book, the user guide on FlexSim. Tangentially related to that is a primer that I do that I'm in the process of updating. They're not competitors. I think they work together, but one is just, like I say, a primer on getting started on FlexSim. Christoph's material is much more in-depth and goes much further, but mine is meant to be a starting point, if you will. A simulation primer, the article I wrote in the Simulation Manager, again, talks about a lot of this, about really what's the first thing you do to introduce somebody? What do they need to know to start with before we get into modeling or, almost demoing the software? What kind of understanding do they need? So it's 3 or 4 pages. I tried to summarize what I thought that was, so you could almost give that, or at least maybe even take and boil that down to something smaller and give it to somebody to maybe understand what, especially in organizations where simulation is not well known, or people have a different perception of, different types of engineers have a different thought about what simulation means, or architects or anybody else have different ideas, and they're different than ours. So we need to kind of get them into understanding that. It's certainly an article on games, which again I've mentioned and will continue to mention. I think it's a real critical aspect to teaching and learning about simulation. And then finally on e-learning. There's an article in there on e-learning, which again I think is an important part of pulling this together. So kind of an initial, when I originally was doing this, I had an idea that, okay, I want to build this roadmap. And so I started, this is not necessarily the way I want to go now, but it's a good way to kind of, I think, at least start to structure it, is, again, I think you need the fundamentals of what simulation is first, and then you go into the basics of FlexSim. So I kind of put together some steps or modules or whatever, starting with the real basics of, which is almost like that Simulation Manager article. What's simulation and why do we care? And then a little bit on modeling, a little bit on analysis, maybe some topics that you could or could not get into before you started into FlexSim. Might be, okay, let's just use simulation to solve a small problem or do some what-if analyses. And that's, again, where games come in or pre-built models. And so we're not talking about modeling yet. We're just using the software and make decisions. Also, thinking about simulations as projects at some point, I think it's important that people understand a little bit about how simulation is done. Doesn't necessarily have to come right at the beginning, but it's an option to come in there. And then people might want to understand a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes. How does this thing really work in a simple case? Then moving into some basics of FlexSim, and then this would continue on, and we would get into more the modeling, and then could go into more detailed modeling and so forth as needed. The things on the left, your left, I try to cover in the simulation primer, and that's on simulation. It's really not about any software. It does have one chapter that says, okay, why do you want to consider using FlexSim? But other than that, it's all background material. And then either Christoph's book or the simulation primer, user manual, training materials, all kinds of things starting to come into play on the right-hand side. I think it's also important to have a glossary. So a lot of new terms. So we need to define those so we're all speaking the same language. And so what this kind of looks like is, again, each one of these modules, I could see have just a short description of what's included or not included. And then maybe a way to get to the materials themselves, and whether that's videos or text, combinations of those that would support that module. And again, a glossary that kind of defines those terms. So a little bit more conceptual approach is, which I think is probably a little bit more realistic approach to how to do this, to go in this direction. I don't know exactly how to do it all yet, but anyway, is to take all those learning modules that we described, and so we have those as a repository. They're not really connected per se. In the previous one, they're all, okay, you do this step. Well, it depends on the objective and the background of, I may not have to go through certain steps. So then you basically build what I call learn lists, like a playlist on your music. Well, you get a learn list on simulation. And if you're a student, for example, that's going to use simulation to learn a concept in one of these non-simulation focused classes, you probably only need to read one of these modules, or whatever material form we end up putting that in, whether it's video or text or both or whatever. That's all you really need to know. That stakeholder who's maybe working on the shop floor or a manager or whatever, maybe only that one also, but then there's a couple others being projects and so forth that they may also want to do. So you could kind of link those together. And then if you're, one thought is, before you do the FlexSim training, it might be a good idea to have, if you can get somebody to do pre-training materials, then this is something you don't really need to teach. You can read it or watch the video. But then when they come into training, everybody's on the same playing field. They really do know what, somebody might go, oh yeah, I know simulation, and they're a mechanical engineer. Their simulation is a lot different. So these might be the kind of modules that you'd pick together. And you might want them to do some real basic stuff with FlexSim before they even come to training, because again, you don't need to spend that. You acted more, in the education world, we call it a flipped classroom. There's a lot of material you can just give the students to do before class that I don't need to stand up there and teach. They can read it and they'll get a pretty good understanding. If they have questions, we can use class time or lab time to work on that. So this is the same thing. You can flip it a little bit on the training, is let the person coming into training do a little bit of that work beforehand. And use the trainer time and expertise to really help with the hard part, okay? And then, so that would involve some kind of, again, using the word, like a learning navigator to get through that repository and put together these kind of lists. So that's the notion of some thoughts on the direction that we would like to go, or at least I would like to go. Of course, you need content first, and that's what I've been focusing a lot on, is getting the content, but also thinking about, while I'm doing that, okay, what are we going to do with this once we get some of the content developed? Of course, we have to have a way to maintain that and manage the content. And this would be a case where I think we would encourage people to add to that. It's not just me or InterMarium. It's any of the users could contribute to that and serve a niche in that particular market. Because I find, I'll look at videos and stuff and say, well, that's really good. What I think is good, it might be in Spanish, but then if we find something that really covers something very well, then just get it translated, say, to English or whatever other language that you want to, that you're training in. So kind of putting this all together, again, it'd be nice to have a centralized, kind of moderated learning platform that would allow us to control and distribute the materials. In terms of concept, I see that going kind of two directions. For registered users, which maybe means they have a FlexSim account, so it's not public, it's not maybe totally public domain, but the only thing you have to do is have a FlexSim account. And then a subscribed user would indicate some form of payment, okay? And so some of the things that would fit into this, of course, is this generic university course that we're putting together, the training videos, certain text materials and books and primers and stuff might be for free, and so they're available through that. Some games might be free, case studies, things like that. And then the subscribed users, there may be some specialized courses that could be there that, again, people would have to probably pay for, or it may be certain types of users. There's a relationship with a distributor or something that allows them access. Specialized training. Certain books you might be able to purchase through that as opposed to having them free, and then certain games, to make them available, there probably would be a fee for certain games. And so then, in a way to do that, we need some infrastructure basically to go in that direction. So, what does that platform look like, and who's going to manage it, and how do you control access and things like that? So these are some things that we still need to kind of address, but it's always chicken or which comes first, the cart or the horse, content, and then this infrastructure to do that. And we're trying to do kind of this both at the same time. So I realized that part of my presentation said where to start, so I'm going to end with where to start. And the first thing is, and I mentioned this before, is an article in the Simulation Manager that is really the basics of fundamentals of, okay, what is simulation, why is it used, and so forth. It's a good place to start. It's a 4-page read. And the other is a simulation primer. Again, this is not dealing with FlexSim, this is general. It's been just updated, I just completed it, and it again covers the approach is that 5 W's and H, who, what, where, why, how. And a lot of the how is it's not detailed. Again, it doesn't really get into the software, it's just basic understanding. So that's a resource either for somebody that could read the whole thing or maybe just take parts of it that they think would be applicable to their clients. So with that, And with any of these, and both on the not just the presentation, but if any of these materials and so forth, I'd certainly be welcome to your comments. That's how we get better, is getting people's different views and trying to incorporate those. My email is the same, except it's not flexsim.com, it's autodesk.com. And I think it's still getting forwarded. If you do FlexSim, I think they're still getting bounced to my Autodesk, but it'd be better to start and just do autodesk.com. And that's all I have, and I'd be willing to get comments. If we've got a little bit of time for a couple minutes for comments or questions, I'd be glad to take those. Also, I'll be here today and tomorrow, so if you want to talk offline, I'd be glad to do that as well. So,
so let's thank Alan with a big applause. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for a very inspiring speech. So I saw that you are interested in, so maybe there are some questions to Alan. This is your time. So maybe somebody want to ask, so raise your hand and one question.
Good. I thought I lost everybody, but okay.
On this e-learning platform will be ready on the 1st of December. Have I understood it?
No, I'm sorry if I implied that. No. The e-learn, what is available by December 1st is going to be a course. It's probably initially going to be housed, I would guess, on the FlexSim, US FlexSim website. And until we get this e-learning platform, that's further down the road. But the course, we're in the process of putting that course together, and so that'll have slides, quizzes, syllabus, whatever, in general, and that should be available by December, but not the e-learning platform. Now, InterMarium has an e-learning platform already. They may want to do something with that, but I'm talking about more of a general e-learning platform.
Mm-hmm. But the question is, what will start on the 1st of December or in December at the end of this year? It will be available for everyone. Can we know the website address or how to get there? When you create it, how can we find this website?
Okay. I don't know right now. It's more than likely going to go through, again, flexsim.com. But if you email me, or there may be some kind of an announcement come out about that. But anything, if you email me, I can give you the link once we know what it is specifically. Because part of it is dealing with Autodesk as well. We don't know how this is going to get housed. So that's why I can't tell you right now. And I've been focusing on the material, and I figured we'll get it out there somehow. So for now.
And one question more about the e-learning platform. It was stated that there will be available also games. Are these games already ready or not?
Some of them are. Now, the definition of a game, there may be a little difference in definition. I know that InterMarium has done a lot with games, and some of those they may make available. Some of them I know are limited to certain institutions. And what we would like to do is to take some of those and make those available on a broader scale, either in that subscribe space or registered user. We don't know yet on how that would go. We also have, they're kind of small, I generally categorize them as a game, but they're pre-built models with a discussion of, it's a particular problem. And it has a user interface that allows students or users to change parameters, and then a pre-built dashboard that shows the results. And so that's kind of a mini game, and some of those are available now. And again, you can contact me, I can show you those. But they're the ones that I have developed and stuff are a much lower level, if you will, than some of the games that are being developed like at InterMarium. So they're two differences. But I found them really useful just to get people interested in simulation, and we've used them in recruiting classes or where you might bring in high school students that's interested in industrial engineering department. The games, again, are quite simple and restricted in terms of what you can do. But it can be competitive, and we divide them into groups and let them compete. And they start to see, even on this simple game, the value of simulation. And especially with, you know, all the 3D and stuff, they really enjoy it. And so there's a title of a book called Serious Play, and that's kind of what we're trying to get at is, yeah, it's a game, but it's, you know, the implications are serious about what you're trying to do and the changes you're trying to make, and doing it through a virtual environment rather than going out and changing things in your facility. So with those, some of those are available anytime, but the more sophisticated games, we'll have to see where that goes.
And one question more.
Sure.
For how many years American students expertise or experience this FlexSim program? How many years can they have experience with FlexSim in US? Because in Poland we just start with FlexSim. I mean our university, and I would like to know how much time we are late to American students.
Oh, well, I started using FlexSim in my class 18 years ago. But a lot has changed since then. And again, the students, it's just, you know, each student gets exposed to one class. So it's not that so it's not like they have all this history. It may be faculty have this history, but then it's, you know, things change. And not only the software, I mean, the software changes, but I mean, that's, and improves and gives new capabilities. But the way I would teach it today is a lot different than I think back to the first simulation class I taught, and I just thought, oh man. But I taught the way I was taught, and then because that's kind of natural. And then the more you get into it, you think about, well, is this really what I need to do? Is this what they really need to know? And the technology has changed so much; it makes it easier to cover a lot of things faster. So. But I don't see American students having a huge, you know, 18-year advantage over students in Poland. They're probably pretty close. Knowing what some of the universities and stuff are doing in Poland, I would say they're probably, in cases, they're equal or advanced. Some things are going on here that I think are more advanced than I know of that's going on in the U.S. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I saw one more question.
Autodesk is showcasing FlexSim 2025 on their website. Do you have any insight on that? When will it be released?
What was on FlexSim 2025?
Yeah, Autodesk is showcasing this on their website.
I think you'll hear more about that later in the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll save that to the experts. So.
And one more question on the side of the room.
Yeah.
FlexSim was started some cooperation with the Autodesk, and in industry we are using different types of the software for the 3D modeling, yes, not only from the Autodesk. Should users of the other manufacturers of the software be afraid that some function will be not supported in the FlexSim, or some 3D models will be not easily uploaded to the FlexSim environment? How will look the future of the FlexSim development, knowing that it's part of the Autodesk?
Again, I'll save that for my colleague, Roger Hullinger, and others to address that. I don't foresee that as a problem, but I'll let the experts talk on that.
Yeah, we'll have a presentation from Roger and from Jonna after the lunch break. So we show you the roadmap of FlexSim plans. Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Thank you. Professor Allen, you reviewed the handbook of Krzysztof Jurczyk, and what do you think about it, and who will benefit from this book the most?
I think it's a real impressive document, and I think certainly it would be useful in education if you're teaching FlexSim as part of a class. And I think it'd be very beneficial for industry as well. That if you're developing a model and you want something quick to look at, it's a very good resource, very clear, and it's comprehensive to cover one particular aspect, or at least get you. And it can't cover everything. I don't think anybody. Roger may disagree with this, but I don't think anybody knows what is how to do everything in FlexSim. But it's, I think a lot of times what you need is enough information to then go to the user's manual that comes with FlexSim. I think the user manual is great, but it's a reference to me. It's not a learning tool. I mean, there's tutorials and stuff, but so something like the Krzysztof's User's Guide is a great start to get you that background to get into it. And but no, it's a great resource.
Thank you.
So one more question.
Yeah, Professor, thank you for this inspiring lecture. I've got quite general question. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience in teaching serious games, and I wanted to ask you, what do you think about teaching some skills related to human resources, for example, presentation skills or communication skills through simulation games? Have you ever tried it, and what do you think about it?
I actually haven't tried it, but I think it'd be kind of similar to what we try to accomplish when we do projects. I always consider projects an important part of a course, but we could use the games as a similar means in terms of not just teaching, building the model or doing the analysis, but again, how do you present those results into a manager of some sort that and I think the games could do that. You could play the games, and then what do you learn, or what are you going to present and take from that and pass on to the manager, because they're not going to spend the time to go through that. So I think it's a good resource, and I think that's an important skill that we need to use with that. And I found in the U.S. we're doing more and more of this, so I think it's good, courses require even short presentations in a lot of different it may not be their focus, but whether it's a project or even some type of an assignment, whether it's individual or group, you have to come through and do a succinct, very short presentation on what's your recommendations and why. And so I think games provide a really good vehicle for doing that. You don't have to actually go through and build the model, but you can use it in that environment. So, thank you.
Okay, so there is no more questions. So Alan is also be available during the whole event, so you can ask him later. So let's thank Alan once again with a big applause.
Thank you.